I don't know, like over 10 years since I last talked to you.
A lot
And you were kindly one of the early people that let me, interview you in early on in my podcasting experience. But can you just explain what Internet FM is?
Absolutely. Internet FM is a platform that includes mobile, desktop, TV set top, web-based versions of our platform, which is basically grouping a bunch of radio stations together, the prominent feature of which they're all independently owned radio stations by people like myself who either had broadcast experience or learned along the way and figured that they could do a better job than your typical terrestrial radio station. So we've cobbled together 50, and these were all hand selected, and they come across 10 different genres, whether it's rock, hard rock, oldies, jazz, blues, country, even an ambient chill station, as well as a station that does Broadway and movie soundtracks.
And what is your broadcast experience?
Mine, I've been in this business for well over 30 years. I actually started in high school, believe it or not, when I was working for a whopping $2.50 an hour. And then I decided to go to college and try something else. But really, I had a love for the medium. So eventually I came back to it and started my own broadcast company. We were doing, in the old days, we bought time on a couple of stations in Chicago. One of them, if some of the people here in this area are familiar with WCBR, The Bear, where we did 2 hours of music and then we did sports overnight. And then as those opportunities changed, we reinvented ourselves and we did syndication. You call it podcasting now, but back in the day, it was really syndication, where we did sports program, a talk program, and I've got a music program. And then about 10 years ago, sounds like about the same time that you got started as an early pioneer in podcasting, I created a radio station called Acid Flashback Radio. Because again, I felt that I could do a better job than your typical program director, and without having the handcuffs of the FCC and licensing, and then having to sell a bunch of commercial inventory, I would put that together and create ostensibly, what would be progressive rock, kind of like WNEW or WLS, or people out west, if you're familiar with KLOS or KSAN, and just do a real progressive, anything goes, whether we're playing rock or blues or jazz or reggae or new wave, and do it in a way that I thought would be better. And, I'll put it up against any radio station. Then in 2018, my son came into the picture here, Eric, because he had a very, very good idea, and one of what I call our aha moment of, I'll let you explain.
Yeah. So I was living in Longmont, Colorado at the time, and I would go every week on Thursdays to Left Hand Brewing Company that a vinyl night, gotten into the whole vinyl revival scene. I would bring a record, get a free beer, schmooze, talk music with people. He was visiting and he wanted to show his station to someone else at the bar, and was going through a whole rigmarole process of pulling it up on the tablet, connecting to the Wi-Fi, going to the website, launching the player. It was a whole process. And I basically said, this is stupid and tedious. This should just be an app, push button, get radio. Kind of looked and said, yeah, we should make an app. And then the next day, as we're road tripping out, we decided, it shouldn't just be our station. We should also do Handcrafted Radio and Radio Free Phoenix and all these other, stations that we have gotten to know the owners of. They kind of had a similar ethos, like deep libraries and playing lesser known artists, and this, more professional presentation rather than just it's a big dump of music on shuffle. So we created the first version of Internet FM with just 15, 16 stations, not really a whole lot. It's since grown to over 50, but we want to keep that list small so that our listeners know they're always getting the top shelf radio.
Okay, so how do you define top shelf radio?
Well, the stations, our criterion are along the lines of, we like a deep library. We want somebody who preferably has broadcast experience. And then thirdly, somebody who's using software, because, everybody thinks, well, I can just take a bunch of songs and put them out there and just put a random shuffle. And not everybody realizes there's a lot more that goes into programming a radio station, whether it's day parting, whether it's selecting the format, or putting in the what I call the radio elements, the little liners, the celebrity endorsements, top of the I do top of the hour, even though I'm not required by FCC to do it, because that's the way that radio works.
Yeah, it's hard to put into exact words, but if you listen to a station for an hour, you'll get a sense of their personality. And we generally go for stations that have these rich personalities, as opposed to, again, just this is a dump of music, with not a lot of afterthought put into it.
And we will literally talk with every station owner, because we want to make sure that they're like-minded. We don't want them to be part of a, iHeart or a terrestrial group. We really prefer independently owned stations. And when we sit down and explain what we're trying to do here, how we're trying to make this high quality, less is more, they all buy into it.
Well, what kind of stations are these? Broadcast stations or just internet or what?
Internet only.
Internet only.
And yeah,
they're all over the world. I mean, we've got Arizona, California, I've got Birmingham, South Carolina, Indiana, Michigan, and then we've got 3 stations in England, 9 in the Netherlands, and 1 in France.
That is exciting. So what is their genre, would you say?
Well,
it predominantly runs rock, alternative, and a little bit of indie. But again, we also cross over into backwards into oldies and jazz. There's a couple of blues stations, and a couple of like more niche rock formats. So we've got a couple that are just jam, a couple that are just progressive rock, a couple that are just modern music, and then
we also
half a dozen like country stations.
And we learned something very interesting. To me, a good station has a big library so that there's not a lot of repeats. But what I've learned, 2 things about country music programming is, one, there is almost no crossover between classic country, Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, and new country, and all the audiences are literally mutually exclusive. So now we've got 3 country stations and then a couple more contemporary classic country type stations.
Yeah. Did you see the Ken Burns documentary of country?
Not yet. I bet you're like the 4th person who's told me about that.
Yeah, you should look.
Fine.
Yeah, Eric, did you see it?
No, I'm just saying that sounds like a sign that we ought to sit down and watch it if we're going to keep expanding into this space.
No, you should do that, because they do talk about the separation between, the more pop style country and the classic country. It's about the evolution of country, basically.
Yeah, because I like our stations to have at least 5,000 or 6,000 different songs in the library. I have 15,000 at this point.
I think our biggest have over 20.
And then I'm talking to the country guy. He goes, "Well, I only have about 2,000 songs." I'm like, and then as I'm learning and explaining, that people want to hear these artists over and over again. It just befuddles me, because that's so the antithesis of what I'm trying to do.
It's a very different world. But aside from the deep library being excluded by the format, the personality and the dedication to the art is still there.
And as most importantly, no commercials whenever possible.
Yeah, a couple of stations have to run it, but we try to go for commercial-free stations. And the platform itself also has 0 ads, no pop-ups, no banner ads, nothing. You dismiss this and then get to the product. It's right there. We don't like ads, and so we didn't, as consumers. So we did not want to ask our customers to have to endure them, just so that we could make the business work.
So is it subscription based, or how?
Yes. So in turn, that means that we are relying on a subscription model, which we have just launched last week.
Yeah. So we're basically asking for $4.99 a month, or $49.99 a year. And that gets you all you can eat, 50 stations to choose from. And as we continue to add more stations or a few more genres, there's really almost something for everybody, and it's really, this is our key word here is passion. It's really about passionate music fans, and we're passionate music fans. So it's this is not for somebody who turns on the radio to hear their favorite song or their top hits, whatever the top 40 of pop is right now. This is for people who turn on the radio because they want to hear something new, and they trust the stations they like to give it to them. And we're all about it. Again, so we have the platform, and I have Acid Flashback Radio as the flagship station. Is we're really into new music discovery, and with Eric's help, who's been just instrumental in really digging down and finding new artists that still fit the format. They would have fit perfectly in the 60s or 70s because of the style of music and their presentation. But so we're adding them all the time, like King Gizzard, Frankie and the Witch Fingers, Pearl and the Oysters,
Nude Party, White Denim, Gum,
the Beths. And so these are if you're sitting here thinking, well, classic rock, but it fits, which is really amazing.
But is it from back then? Or are you talking about people?
No, modern music.
These are all
modern, these are if these artists released their music in 1975, they would have gotten on progressive radio, on alternative or album oriented radio. But that format doesn't really exist on the terrestrial band anymore. So if you want to find these artists, you have to basically find them via word of mouth. You have to join internet forums or like go diving on YouTube. YouTube spelunking can be dangerous. So we're trying to bill ourselves as the bringing these new artists who should be on the radio onto the radio. We want to be the place you come to get new music that fits along with that old classic rock.
So exactly. So we could see Jimi Hendrix, Jefferson Airplane, King Gizzard, no problem.
Yeah, I was gonna say, remember, I'm sure you remember this, Steve. Remember when college radio used to break bands? I mean, they used to play a lot of alternative stuff. So what about college radio? What do you think of it now? Or either of you, same with Eric. Eric, did you go to college?
I went to college. I didn't listen to college radio. I mean, I went to the University of Southern California. So Los Angeles is kind of a big market as it is. It's not like it was a college town where there's just a local radio station.
Because I remember when I was growing up, I'm sure, Steve, I forgot, are you from Chicago?
No, I'm from North Carolina. So WXYC was the college radio station in Chapel Hill. And they were the ones that were playing REM and a lot of those early 80s bands.
Yeah, because what I remember is Northwestern. Okay, so they still have a radio station here in Evanston, and they played a lot of new music and new bands, and they broke foreign bands, and U2 went on there, and early Kraftwerk was on stations like that, even in Ohio. You know what I mean? And that's where you went for cutting edge, even early rap. And I'm talking early days of rap. I'm not talking about hip hop. They had a whole thing going on. So I guess now it is only online. I'm sure there's some stations out there still breaking bands.
Does Lake Forest station still broadcast?
Yeah, so there's WMXM up here in Lake Forest. I actually I spent some time there before Internet FM started. But yeah, it really is going to depend on who the program director is. I mean, they have so much more to choose from. So I'm sure in college radio, you're going to hear this humongous variety, just depending upon who's sitting behind the board that day.
Yeah, I think, again, part of the issue is that college kids nowadays get their music online.
Yeah. Well, is it expensive to have a music radio online station?
The single biggest expense is royalties, because you have to pay the writers, ASCAP, BMI, CSAC.
So that's about a combined like $1,200-$1,300 a year minimum. We're not going to see that go up until we start getting significant revenues. But the largest single portion is from Sound Exchange, which is performances, and that one does scale very linearly with number of listeners.
Yeah, and I empathize with artists that are going like, we're not getting paid enough. And as a broadcaster, I got to tell you, it's a real sore spot, because what we're paying, it doesn't seem like a lot. It's like 0.2 cents per performance, but it adds up really quickly. We only have a few thousand listeners every month, and yet we always get pretty close to that. It's $1,000 minimum for Sound Exchange, because we have to, since we're public facing, we have to go out there and make those payments and the minimum. But like Eric says, it scales almost linearly. So if you imagine somebody like WDRV here in Chicago or XRT, if they had to pay Sound Exchange, they're exempt. Those would run probably in the millions.
What is Sound Exchange?
That's why you see a company like SiriusX, like Spotify. I mean, I looked at their last quarter. I geek out on income statements. So in their last quarter, they had €5 billion in revenue, and they lost €500 million, €500 million, because their royalties, I think, is 70% of their cost. It's just, there's no easy solution because artists need to get paid, but radio stations need to be able to make a living.
Well, where the rub comes, and not to try to get too ranty about it, is that in between Spotify paying out the performance and the artist collecting money, if they have a record deal or a record label, they're going to take some off the top of that. So unless they're, completely independently published artist, some of that money goes to pay the record. So if it's 1 million streams at that rate, then it's $2,000 payout. But if the artist sees all $2,000 of it, that's rare.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Well, first of all, what is Sound Exchange?
It's basically a
Sound Exchange was set up. So the government, and again, we're getting into politics.
I think this is in the wake of the DMCA. They basically set up a way for anybody who streams music online to pay royalties, the same, in a similar way that a radio station would. But instead of saying, well, we kind of had this many listeners, and this is what we played. Instead, the technology lets us say, okay, we played, Once in a Lifetime by Talking Heads, and there were 40 people listening. So we pay 40 times the rate of the per performance to Sound Exchange. And then we also send them a receipt at the end of the month with everything we played. And they'll say, oh yeah, 40 people heard Once in a Lifetime. So here's, some pennies that go to the estate of Talking Heads and David Byrne and all that.
Okay.
Yeah. And see, this is something, in some ways it's a little outdated because this was passed probably in the 1990s when Napster was out there. So there are a lot of these rules that in some ways they become very archaic. But basically, Congress set up what's called the Copyright Royalty Board. And every 5 years, they hold a trial, which is a 3-judge panel, and they basically set the rate. So what happens is if you're a broadcaster, you got to go hire a lawyer, get in there and go through the process. And it's insanely expensive.
Yeah, there's really let's try to off ramp from this rant here. But basically, Sound Exchange is a whole boondoggle of red tape that supposedly helps get some money to artists. But unless you're a huge household name, it's only getting you, a small portion of your income, and you're going to be making a lot more money off of touring, ticket sales, and merch.
But
I was going to say, you did mention, not making much money, and the record companies take some money from, when somebody creates an album. And it reminds me of, I don't know if you ever read the book, and I forgot the name of it, but it's written by somebody from Semisonic, the group. Do you remember, the Closing Time is their most famous song?
Yeah. I know Semisonic.
Yeah, and he wrote a book, and I forgot his name, but anyway, and he was talking about how they would record an album, and then the record company would take a certain amount off, like we did this for you, so they just cut into their profits. So they said basically the way to make money is for groups to tour and play live shows.
Oh yeah, it's the same stuff as like Hollywood accounting. Oh, like the budget for the movie was this much. Oh, but you also ordered all this catered lunch. Oh, and we have to market it. No, we have to do all this of stuff. So essentially, if an artist actually makes money from a record, it's only after it's sold a whole bunch, or if they're famous enough and like well known enough that they can get more favorable terms on the record deal. Most artists, they want the deal so they can get their music out there so they can tour before a larger audience. It's changed a lot now because the tools required to make music are a lot more available. So there's a lot more people publishing on smaller indie labels who are just happy to distribute the music and not necessarily they want to make money, but they're not looking to make, Fortune 500 money. And there's also a lot of artists I follow that like publishing stuff independently.
But also, if you think about the dynamic of how the business model going forward is going to be, if you're an artist and you're on Spotify or whatever, Spotify charges a flat fee. So it doesn't matter if you listen 2 hours a day, 2 hours a week, or 2 hours a month, Spotify still gets their $10, $12, $15. What happens is if you're like a huge heavy user and you're in the car all day and you're listening to 5, 6, 7 hours a day, Spotify technically is probably going to lose money on you. And the problem for artists is that I see the business going forward is you're going to almost literally give your music away. And like Eric said, the way that artists are going to make money in the future is going on tour, selling merchandise. And like him, he's a big vinyl collector, is getting people to buy your t-shirts and vinyl on site.
Yeah. And Eric, I'm interested because, vinyl was around, of course, when I was younger. Mm-hmm. What is the attraction to you and other people?
I think for some, it's having a physical product. So in an age where everything is, we rent all our music, we rent all our movies, hey, Netflix no longer has my favorite show. Well, I don't have, I didn't buy it on DVD. I don't own it. I can never see it again. They want to be able to have a physical thing with their music so that, at the end of the world, or at least if Spotify folds and goes under, they still have their music. Some of it, I think, is like the physical ritual of, take out the record, put it on, dust it off, turn on the stereo. There's like, you invest time into the listening. So you want to get this more high quality thing. Some of it, I think, is just people like collecting things. I know people who have collect pop, vinyl pop figurines, or, like posters or trading cards or anything. So it's a collecting thing. And then some of it is legit. I like this artist. I want to support them. I'll throw money at them and I'll take a vinyl in exchange,
Now, do you know why? Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was going to add that it's interesting because when I was a kid, you couldn't afford to go out and buy every single record out there. So somebody would say, okay, I'm going to go get the new Led Zeppelin album. And then that afternoon, we'd all go over to their house and we would I remember listening to Physical Graffiti for the first time. And, now in this online world, you don't really have that same experience, but I do notice, and I just read an article, I don't know if it was New York Times or Washington Post, about people are collecting CDs, even if they don't have CD players in their cars, because they just like the idea of collecting, which I find that kind of amusing, but I never sold mine. So I still have a huge collection.
Yeah, so I was asking, why vinyl instead of CDs?
Well, for some people, the vinyl actually has a better sound. It's so compressed on a CD that I think when you put a vinyl, and that assumes you got a turntable, an amp, and some big speakers.
You need an investment in the gear, but I think people enjoy the analog experience.
Now, do you know? Yeah, go ahead.
Also, they look cool. Not only has it been a resurgence in vinyl as a technology, but like the disc itself has art to it, and it'll have it's got a back art, it's got a gatefold, it's got sometimes a booklet. So I think the idea that it's more than just the song itself, but there's all these other physical components. People get enjoyment out of it.
Well, he's a King Gizzard fan here, and he's literally got every album except one or two.
Yeah, I'm missing one album.
Because if I had it, I'd give it to you. I mean, I have a turntable and I have vinyl, but I gave some away already. So, but now, okay, what I'm wondering is, do you know when this whole vinyl resurgence started? Because of course, for a while it went down.
When it was Of Montreal putting out their stuff.
Well, some of it was, I think also Jack White with Third Man Records. They started pressing records, and then they also started doing one. It was Unique Things, and then Record Store Day. I think it's just an interesting confluence of events that brought it out. And then all of a sudden, touring bands started pressing their own vinyl, and they because now you can make the splash patterns and all these kind of.
Yeah, why not grab one? I'm gonna grab a couple.
Okay.
Oh, that's true, because some bands put out these like sparkle looking ones or something. They're special editions, and even people in Europe want to get them.
Well, and when I was a kid, I loved the fact that not only that you had the vinyl, the gatefold with the lyrics, but also then bands like Chicago used to put posters in all their albums. So it was not just get the album, but let's see what the poster looks like. Yeah. I don't know. It's to me, it's so hard to explain because vinyl is the most limiting one. You got to get up, you got to physically go and change the record over. You can only get about 20 minutes aside, but I find it fascinating. I stopped buying it, and I basically told Eric, I said, whatever I got's yours.
Yeah, that's good. That's nice.
Don't buy anything that I already have, because someday it'll be his.
Yeah. Now, when I interviewed you and even met you offline, so I think I met you at Marty's many years ago, and I think that's how we connected, so I can interview you. Because you were friends with Marty, right?
Marty Zivin, right? Well, he was. He was sort of like my sensei. He's the one who really got me into the streaming radio, because he had all the
few cool discs.
Yeah, he had all the stuff left over from WCBR, and he's like, yeah, I've got. He was streaming online, and he had a LP, a low power FM that he was broadcasting in Hoffman Estates, Arlington Heights, and all that. I went and he showed me his whole operation. I said, you can do all this and it goes online. I'm like, I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
So he
That's
got
cool.
started. All credit goes to Marty for this.
But I mean, how's it been? Because like I said, I talked to you 10 years ago. You and I basically started around the same time with digital stuff. I mean, how have you been able to keep it going for so many years?
Well, I mean, there were some lean years there for a while. I did anything I could to keep it going, doing some other outside part-time work where I could. In some ways, I had to wait for the technology to catch up to what was my vision.
Yeah.
And that obviously has picked up a lot in the last 5 or 6 years that makes some of this possible.
Mm-hmm. We've had some amount of listener support, people who donate occasionally. So we're hoping that we can get the same kind of spirit, but instead of just begging for money, now it's we have a subscription we can offer and cool service we can do in exchange.
Yeah, because nobody wants to sit there and
wow.
have radiothons twice a year, 3 times a year. We figured, okay, we just, like you said, we don't want to do ads. I find ads are annoying. Ads are one of the reasons I don't listen to terrestrial radio anymore. And yeah, because think about it. You go to some of these stations, especially the big ones, iHeart and whatever, and you're going to have a 5-minute break at about 15 after and 15 quarter till the top of the hour. And that's 10 commercials each time. I mean, I feel bad for the advertisers that are sitting in the middle of that. Who's going to listen to that? We're a society of button pushers. You hear commercials 9 times out of 10, unless you're in the middle of something and it's just on in the background, you're going to change the station.
Yeah. But I mean, also, doesn't Spotify have commercials too? I mean, online outlets also have commercials.
Well, so Spotify and Pandora and all, they have ads if you do not pay a subscription. And I use Spotify enough that I can justify the cost of subscription, so I don't get ads during music.
Now, what is the difference? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Especially since I'm an album kind of guy. If I want to listen to a whole album, I don't want to get an ad in the middle of the record, especially if it's like the kind of album where the songs flow from one to the next.
That's really funny because, if you look at, I read books about, music history and broadcast history, and they definitely talk about the downfall of vinyl. And I lived through the downfall of vinyl, and people used to think it was this crazy archaic thing. And now it's come up and now you're almost hip, listening to it or, using it.
The downfall of vinyl was probably created by the CD, because now all of a sudden you can take all that information, put it on a single little disc that's lighter, more portable, takes up less space. And then you can jump from song to song without having to walk over to the turntable and move the needle.
They are also cheaper.
Yeah, that's true. And they sounded really crisp. I mean, back then it was really revolutionary to listen to crisp sounding music.
Mm-hmm. But I got to tell you, I went to a talk by Brian Eno once. Yeah, he gave a speech.
Wow.
I think he was at the Park West, and he was basically going through this whole scenario where they were mastering CDs. And I don't remember the exact way he described it, but he was aghast at the fact that they were taking the high end, the low end, and the way they were processing the sound. And it just sounded like it was like nails on a chalkboard to him. And I would agree that the sound on a CDs, even some of the digitals, is just still not as good as just even with the pops and the clicks. It's nothing like that sound, that full range of sound you get with vinyl.
So I'd also say the biggest advantage that CDs and cassettes had over vinyl was portability. You could listen to it in the car, you could carry it around in a Walkman. But with streaming, you can still do that now anyway, and you don't have to actually carry the disc with you to listen to what you want. You can download it all in MP3 format, which is essentially the same as what the CDs were. So vinyl is coming back because it's analog. Yeah. It has, you can't get that on CD. You can't get that on streaming.
And ironically, even though adjusted for inflation, the price is the same. It's just so hard for me to wrap my head around $25 or $30 for an album. When I remember in my teenage years, albums were $4.99, maybe $5.99, and a double album might have been $6.99.
Right. But also a lot of people were buying them so they can sell them cheaper, because especially if you're going to buy those pretty ones like you showed, Eric, then it's going to be more.
When you adjust it for inflation, the price is the same. Yeah. But it just mentally, I just can't wrap my head around $30 for Sgt. Pepper's when I paid $5 for it back in the day.
Right. Okay. Now, when you're talking about the mix and everything, or crafting the playlist, I think about Radio Paradise. Do you know about them?
Oh, yes.
Radio Paradise.
Radio Paradise is the #1 independent radio station, and we're proud to have them on Internet FM.
Wow, they are amazing. They were one of the early digital based radio stations. I think they came from public radio or something. And they really mix old and new, obscure, mainstream. So, I mean, I think everybody should subscribe to you just for that reason, because if you have them and a whole bunch of other stations, then that's a really good value. And what is he doing?
Oh, yeah, I know.
I
know Bill Goldsmith, who runs Radio Paradise. We've chatted from time to time, and he does a great job. I mean, just doing it all by himself, and he puts out a really good product. Another station, if you like Radio Paradise, is called Radio Free Phoenix, and it was started by a bunch of guys who did underground radio in Phoenix, Arizona, back in the 70s and 80s. And I mean, it's the same story. Every one of these guys will tell you the same story, which is I worked for a radio station. I got fired by the radio station when the corporate suits took over. I think I can do a better job than that radio station, and their product is great. So I've been out to see them. They're in Globe, Arizona, which is, I don't know, about 50 miles west of Phoenix. And they do a great job. They have a whole bunch of presenters. Again, this a guy named Andy Olson cobbled a bunch of his friends who used to be DJs, and he built this radio station. He's got about 18 or 19,000 songs. So you're going to get a pretty good variety. And he does that same thing where he mixes the old and the new.
And well, you were talking earlier about, places that have small playlists and people want to hear the same song. Do you also find that your listeners want to hear a repeat of the song, or do they really want a lot of different choices? I mean,
number one compliment is the breadth and depth.
Yes, we'll often get an email that says, "I haven't heard XYZ in 20 years. Thank you for playing that." Or often they'll request a song that they have yet to hear on our platform, and we'll have to add it in.
Yeah, and so I enjoy that, and part of it is I don't want to play Stairway to Heaven. I don't want to play Sweet Home Alabama. Now, covers of Led Zeppelin, covers or live versions of any Leonard Skinner, that's all good. I purposely actually take those out of the programming. So, if you talk about like Jimi Hendrix, for example, you're going to hear about half a dozen songs on radio. I took literally every one of his every one of the studio albums, all these extra things. I have 130 different Jimi Hendrix songs in our library, and I guarantee you, there's very few stations, if any, that have that sort of breadth and depth.
Right, because they do consumer testing, and they're going with the common denominator, basically.
Yeah, and I don't see our listener as the kind of person who likes to get paid to be in a focus group.
Well, they want, those people listening to terrestrial radio, they want to turn on the radio and hear a song that they know that they love. And if they turn on the radio and they hear something they have not heard before, or that they're tired of, whatever, they don't want to hear, where is my Stairway to Heaven? Where is my, where is my Sweet Home Alabama? They will turn the station to try to find that song. Our listeners are the opposite way around. They'll turn on the station, hear something they never heard before, and go, "What is this?"
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that I tell people, listen, the big corporate radio stations, they're not in the music business, they're in the advertising business, and music is the hook. They know that if they play this, 500 or 600 rotation of songs that were all smash hits, that if somebody catches it, they'll listen, and then all they're trying to do is get them to the commercial break so that they can play ads for them. And, so they're people listening in 15-minute increments. Well, if you go and look at our numbers, our average listener probably listens for hour and a half, and for every person who tunes in for 10 minutes, there's somebody who's been listening for 4 hours.
Mm-hmm. Now,
the radio stations would kill for that kind of loyalty.
Yeah. Now, when you were working in broadcast radio, what did you enjoy about it, Steve?
Well, this was late 70s. Ironically, about a month or two after I started, WKRP in Cincinnati came on the air. So the local newspaper came, and they did a parallel between people who worked at our station and some of the characters on WKRP. So I remember that. Well, I had a great program director. This was the days when you did all kinds of live remotes, and then all these companies, a restaurant would just come by and bring, a dozen barbecue chicken sandwiches for everybody at the station. So you had a lot of these neat little perks, but I was making $2.50 an hour. So there was a downside to all that. And as you can tell, I have a face for radio and a voice for the printed page. So I knew I was not going to be successful in the long term.
Were you on the air?
Yes, I was on the air.
Okay.
I worked 20 hours a week. So I worked 1 or 2 weekend shifts. There was a daytime station. So and I started late in December. So as the year went on, their time off the air, they would go off the air at 6 and then 6:15 and then 6:30. So once they started getting to 6:30, I had a half an hour show, and then it went to 7. I had an hour show. So I was doing that 5 days a week. And then after I graduated high school, I quit.
Okay. Well, are you guys ever live, or how do you guys do it for your online?
Once a week, he'll do live in the studio where he'll, instead of just letting the software mostly run kind of on its own, he'll go and he'll very manually hand tweak the sets and try to focus on like specific artists. Like there's someone whose birthday was in the past week, he'll do a birthday salute, play a couple songs of them. We'll try to use that time to slot in some new music. And then it's not strictly live, but every Saturday I'll do a focus on psychedelic rock, which is, a newly, resurgent format, and try to kind of show the connection between the stuff from the late 60s and the stuff in modern times. So these guys were influenced by this, or this is a similar style, and to try to introduce old listeners to new music.
I could pre-record my show, but at the same time, sometimes it's just fun to sit there and be like the old days, because I can make changes on the fly. Sometimes requests come in. Sometimes I'll see a couple songs that are in the rotation and think, well, you know what, this would be a better choice. So when you can make changes on the fly, it's a lot of that comes from the fact that that's the way we used to do it in the old days. The only difference is I don't have to walk into the record library, go pull a bunch of vinyl and queue it up. It's all in the computer. But the thing that, let's say, the difference between somebody just putting a bunch of songs in and what we're doing here is that I've built an algorithm of how I want each hour of the day to sound. So on Acid Flashback, it sounds very different in the morning, where it's light, it's trippy. You got your James Taylor, your Crosby, Stills and Nash. Then as it morphs into the afternoon, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Smashing Pumpkins, Jimi Hendrix, that kind of stuff. And then late at night, it's anything goes.
Yeah.
20-minute songs.
Yeah, we play all the weird stuff. That's when we bust out, the Frank Zappa, or like the King Crimson, Lark's Tongue and Aspic, all the weird experimental stuff.
Or even Of Montreal, because they've got some pretty out there songs that are 8, 9, 10, 12 minutes long. Steve Wilson, for instance, Porcupine Tree, a lot of that stuff, nobody can play that during the day. I don't necessarily play
we'll
that.
play like Echoes or Supper's Ready or Thick as a Brick.
Or a couple of Grateful Dead songs that naturally go together, like Scarlet Begonia's Fire in the Mountain.
Help Slip Franklin.
And
Do you ever go to the Internet Archive to get Grateful Dead stuff, or do you ever listen to that? You know how a lot of people.
I've used archive.org. Occasionally, if I'm looking, so my day job, my boss is a huge Deadhead, so every once a week I'll put on a live Dead show, and if there's something in particular we're looking for, often I'll have to go find it on Archive.
Yeah, on Archive, you have to download it song by song if you want the high quality stuff. But I'm tapped into that whole network, so I've got just so much of it. Spotify is also a great source for music, and I always tell people, well, why should I listen to you if I can listen to Spotify? And I love to say, you can listen to both. If you hear something on our station that you really like it, maybe you heard something from Jefferson Airplane, like from After Bathing at Baxter's, which is not one of their most popular albums, but is an absolute excellent album. And you go, wow, I want to go and do a deep dive. Fine, go fire up your Spotify and go listen to that album. I got no problem with that. I think that we very symbiotically can coexist with Spotify or Apple.
How are you different from Spotify and Pandora?
Right. So Spotify is and especially Pandora, they'll give you what they think you want to hear, but it's still very algorithmically driven, which means it's going to always give you like the top hits by an artist, and it'll stay very narrowly focused. If you ask for heavy alternative, it's going to keep giving you more of the same. If you ask for like vocalist, big band, jazz, or whatever, you're going to keep getting more of the same. It doesn't necessarily explore well for you, and it's not good at digging deep. And eventually it'll just get repetitive. It'll start playing the same stuff over and over. We do mix it up. The way our presentation works is that we're able to play a lot deeper. You can still do that on Spotify and Pandora, but you have to manually do it. And as someone who has built a lot of very large playlists, it takes a lot of work. So if you're somebody who wants to find new music, wants to hear new stuff, you either have to do it all the legwork yourself, or come find us and we'll play you some cool stuff you've never heard before. And then from there on, that can be the launching point. Hey, I only knew this one Little Feat song, but here's this other one that I just heard on Acid Flashback and sounds really cool. I'm going to go listen to the whole album that it's from. Whereas, again, Pandora, you can't really do that on iHeart. You definitely can't do that on Spotify. You can, but you had to get recommended it, and Spotify doesn't do that very well.
And let's say you're a listener of SiriusXM. Maybe you like Margaritaville. If you start listening to it day in and day out, you're going to notice it gets pretty repetitive quite fast. And when I have 15,000 songs in the library, I program what I call my B cuts, which are pretty good songs, but those will still only air roughly once a week. Then I have the real deeper cuts. I have so many of them, they'll only air once a month. So the chances of you saying like, this is getting repetitive
is very, very low.
It is very low.
Now, have you heard of AccuRadio? That's somebody else. So John Guerin, I interviewed him many years ago.
Yeah. John Guerin and absolutely. Yeah. So they've built a very specialized network. So they've got very special. He said, I think it's like 20 or 30 Beatles channels. Really? I only need one. Yeah. Kurt Hansen is the owner of AccuRadio. And they've built a pretty sizable, but very vast genre with a whole lot of genres and very, 90s and 80s and maybe, hard 90s and soft 90s and pop. It's fine. It's a big playground. We can all play in it.
Right. Yeah. And also I was going to say, you mentioned Beatles. What do you guys consider oldies? Because you said oldies. Like, Eric, what's oldies to you?
I'd say anything I'd say like the Beatles and like Bob Dylan kind of is the demarcation line. It's very arbitrary. That's my demarcation line between like the old way of music and the new way. So oldies would be more like in the Buddy Holly era. What else would be on there?
Well, I look at oldies and I go basically solid gold, right? If it's anything that would have been in the Billboard Hot 100 or even the Billboard Top 10 throughout the year, those are going to be your golden oldies because, right. There's 70s and 80s oldies. Yeah,
there is. I guess for me, it's the difference between when the singer-songwriter era is sort of messed up. So like when you have all the people who were hot performers like Elvis, but they never wrote a single original tune. It was all done by songwriters who would go into the woodshed and bang out 20 songs on the weekend, and maybe 2 of them would be hits. But like that's their job. They just wrote the music. They just wrote the song, and they found a band or a performer to throw it in front of, and it got famous. And they could just rake in money and then keep writing more songs. Whereas you got the Beatles and Bobby Dylan and all these other folks who were writing their own original songs and kind of flipped the music industry and popular music on its head.
Okay, and also you're talking about the resurgence of psychedelic music. Why is that, or how's that? When did that happen?
So there were a few early bands in their early 2000s that were playing it, but they were mostly underground. I would say the big explosion of it came with Tame Impala, which is a band out of Melbourne, Australia. And he, popularized the style of music. It's got a lot of Beatles influence, as well as a lot of other sounds that were very unique to their music environment from the 10 years prior, and got huge international fame. And suddenly there was this huge renewed interest in making more psychedelic music. And you used to get a huge explosion of bands in Australia and in the States afterwards.
And also in Australia, the equivalent of the National Endowment of the Arts has really been very active in supporting the musician and the independent musician scene there. So you're seeing this big confluence of bands coming out of Australia that are psychedelic in nature, like Tame Impala, King Gizzard.
What else would be
Pond,
who was Tame Impala's old band before he started a solo project. I had to go dig up my Spotify library to name it. I don't know if you'd have heard of any of them necessarily, but There's a whole psychedelic explosion that happened there, and a similar scene that happened in the States, just all over. So a lot of bands from New York, a lot of bands from Austin, Texas, a lot of bands from California.
So you're saying that it happened basically with that one band though, and then it led to.
I would say that like it wasn't say that they started it, but it's the interest in that band like followed on to interest in all the other bands that were coming up around the same time and helped them take off.
It also might be an offshoot of the whole jam band scene. Grateful Dead,
No, I would
Fish.
not at all. I'd say there's really no association between them until recently. You were projecting, sir.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, maybe because you know the history. So why do you think then? Why do you not think that?
That there's no association between the jam scene and them?
Yeah, because Stephen, you think that is that true, and then Eric, you think it's not.
Because the jam scene is non-existent in Australia. They're like the Dead and Fish and Humphreys, McGee and String Cheese Incident and Mo and Lettuce. They have no following in Australia, but that's where the kind of the first big wave of psychedelic resurgence came. I mean, again, there were bands that started before Tame Impala in the States and in Australia, but the popularity of Tame Impala led to popularity for all these other bands.
Yeah, it's interesting because, some people criticize the music business because, that's another thing that books have been written about and documentaries, because there used to be more of a local scene in different places, especially in the US. And now it's like the person has to they have to make it internationally or nationally. And also online has no boundaries, but you're talking about something that came out of a certain area in Australia.
It's Melbourne specifically because, they had like a local artist program, which was music and fine arts and before like theater performance and stuff. So a lot of bands were supported on this, and there is a huge local music scene there in Melbourne. They play a lot of all those bands would play a lot of shows there. There is like a resurgence a little bit in local music scenes, and again in a very few pockets in the country. There's a lot of stuff still in New York City. There's a lot of stuff in Los Angeles. There's a lot of stuff in Austin, Texas,
Colorado.
I would say like Denver, Boulder has a huge local music scene. Like there are like internet resources again for people in those cities to show concerts. Like bands looking for shows and stuff. So
I'm wondering, because people nowadays, I mean, do they want to get out? I'm not talking. This has nothing to do with the pandemic, but are people motivated to get out anymore to actually see something live and see physical people? Because I feel like society has changed in such a way that people are behind their screens or behind their phones.
I feel like maybe going out to bars or like meeting people like at church or whatever is not necessarily something people do a lot, but I've been to a lot of concerts now post-pandemic, and people were definitely itching to go back to live music. So it was not necessarily like they want to do it because they want to be among the people. They want to go see the bands. But
well, just look at the concert calendar and shows at Wrigley Field, shows at the United Center, shows at Huntington, here in Chicago. I don't know if they're selling out, but they are certainly. I would agree. There was this post-pandemic desire to go out and see some live music. I would feel absolutely that I was right there.
But I can see with the the blockbusters, but I'm just talking about the more obscure bands or the bands who are starting out who are more regional. Are people still motivated to see in a small venue?
Well, I guess define small venue. Like, do you mean 200 people?
Like 100 people or something, or 200 people, yeah.
Like 100, 200, that's still very much like local bands, or in bands with like cult, very small cult followings. But I've been to a handful of shows for bands at like 600, 700 person theaters, and it was still like sold out. So there again, even the bands who are smaller still have enough of a following that like again they'll draw a crowd in major cities.
I mean, we went to Shuba's, we saw Mamarlarky and about 4 other bands, and
like 150 people. Yeah. I saw a band called the Nude Party at Lincoln Hall, which was, I think that's maybe like 350 people, but it was again sold out and very enthusiastic crowd.
But it's easier in some ways. It's easier for bands to attract a following because you've got all the different social media channels, and you got TikTok, and there are so many ways that bands can attract followers. And then probably the harder part is just putting together the logistics of a tour.
Yeah, you don't have to be a regional band anymore because you don't have to be a huge breakout hit and sell out arenas just to be successful. Because if you're a band from New York, you've got fans in Chicago who found out about you from another music group.
Yeah. And then what do you think makes a band popular? How come there's some really good bands, or some, even for media outlets like, online radio station or whatever, and there's some really popular bands, and but there's some bands that are really good, but they don't get the listeners.
Well, one of the things that can really make a band, and certainly give them big exposures, they get on a playlist, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother long
Right.
conversation.
But that still begets fans when you're traveling, right?
Well, there's still a difference between people who are fans of a band for a single song they know versus people who are fans because they like the entire discography. And I would honestly just say that it's a lot of factors and a lot of dumb luck that can lead to a band being huge. Some of it's just a lot of legwork.
And nothing replaces the old fashioned, you still have to write songs or pick good songs. You have to practice a lot, and you have to be good at concert. If you go, you do a show and you stink out the joint, you're not going to be long. Your career is not going to be very long.
Yeah. But if you put on a good show, then all the fans will go online and say, hey, I just saw this band. They were awesome live. You should go see them. There are quite a few bands that I've gone to see on word of mouth from people I've talked to online.
Now, do special effects and so forth work for you in a concert, or is it more the music?
It's more the music. The special effects is more of like an add-on.
Yeah,
and it's a way to make the show like
enhancement.
It can make the show unique, but it's not the selling point of the show. I'm not here to see fireworks and flamethrowers. I'm here to listen to music.
Yeah, because I think about the superstars who are touring the world, like Taylor Swift. And people say it was really an incredible show. And I watched some stuff online, and I'm like, well, it's probably incredible because she created this vibe with the entire effects and everything. It was like a big party.
Yeah, that's quite a production. I can't say that I've attended any of those things. That's right now with limited dollars or with what I have at my disposal. And I tell people this: I would rather go and see 5 bands playing in small clubs or medium-sized venues for $25 or $50 than to go spend several $100s to go see the Rolling Stones or Taylor Swift. Because, I'd much rather see a band that's going to just play their butts off for 3 hours and it not cost me an arm and a leg.
Yeah, somebody was telling me that's how Bruce Springsteen used to be several years ago. Did you ever go to his early concerts?
I saw Springsteen in 1980, and then I saw Springsteen in Milwaukee in the spring.
Okay, so what was the difference between seeing them, in those years?
Well, I still thought it was a great show. Yeah, he doesn't go run out into the audience anymore, and he doesn't tell the little stories that he used to tell. But the band is tight. He's still got several of his original members, and it was a great show. I paid more than I really cared to, but my wife had never seen Springsteen, so I figured this was an opportunity. Who knows? The biggest thing with me is seeing these old guys. I just saw recently Buddy Guy and George Benson. Is how long are some of these people going to be around? I've got to the point where I'm basically looking at my list of artists I haven't seen and trying to cross them off while they're still alive.
Now, what kind of social media do you guys use? Like, what's effective for you?
Facebook, because we got a lot of older listeners.
Yeah, well, our marketing is mostly through Facebook and through like YouTube, but okay. So again, because our primary audience are going to be baby boomers who are very responsive to the message of, do you miss radio the way it used to be? You miss the old school presentation.
Which makes it harder to go viral, but at the same time, there's a loyalty there that you don't see in some of these other social outlets.
And not necessarily in most of my contemporaries, most of my cohort. The people who dig cool music, people who are hip with it are very much in the minority amongst millennials.
Okay, so you're not a baby boomer, I'm assuming, Eric.
No, he's a millennial.
Okay, so yeah, millennials are really into talking about themselves, analyzing. But what do you think? Like, what are millennials going for? I mean, what's the attraction for them?
You mean generally, or do you mean with our media specifically?
Yeah, like music stuff. I mean, because you're saying that you're appealing to baby boomers. Actually, by the way, a lot of people underestimate baby boomers. I've met a lot of millionaires, like, and you'd look at them and they would never even, nobody would know they're millionaires because they're so down to earth. They're like maybe former hippies or whatever, but baby boomers have a lot of money. So it's a good thing you're going for that. But
My generation sure doesn't.
well, I don't think they did a long time ago, but they've made some great decisions in life. That's all I gotta say.
I can't speak as to what appeals to my generation as a whole because I don't understand most of them.
Really? Why? Okay, why is that? I want to know. Because I'm not a millennial. So
I mean, if I knew why they liked the popular music that they do, then we'd have 1 million subscribers and we'd be playing terrible music.
right.
Instead, we're playing really awesome music for a dedicated but small cadre of listeners. As far as like what people what people my age are who are interested in the kind of music we present, there's definitely like a subset of millennials who have I wish I could have seen Woodstock. Oh, I wish I could have seen, Led Zeppelin when they were touring, or the Doors, or, like there's a whole bunch of like millennial Grateful Dead fans who are like, I wish I could have seen Jerry.
I saw his last concert, by the way, at Soldier Field.
So yeah, so did I. But it's interesting.
Oh, we were there together. Okay.
From an outside looking in,
Yeah.
I would say, and I'm painting broad brushstrokes because obviously there's so many subtle differences. But I think his sister is also a millennial, and she's very different. She's very sort of alt pop oriented, and I think that it's a lot of living in the moment. Because if I asked her today what artist she's listening to, and I ask her 4 months from now, it's going to be different. It's
going to be a little different versus
and him.
A lot of I'm always adding new stuff. There are very few artists or songs that I've cycled out of regular rotation. My interest in like music as more than just a passive consumer started when I was about 12. He'd always be playing like The Drive or whatever else when he was taking us to and from school or synagogue or whatever. And I just picked up the saxophone in band, and then he was playing the radio, and Steely Dan's Deacon Blues came on, and the tenor sax solo really caught my ear. And I'm like, okay, this is cool. This is more than just the usual stuff I'm listening to. Give me more. And so I consumed all of Steely Dan's discography, and okay, what else you got? And then I got, I was raised on the Beatles a little bit from my mom, but it was all like their pop hits, their biggest stuff. Then I started like diving into the Beatles and diving into Led Zeppelin and U2 and
I couldn't have been happier.
Yeah, and Pink Floyd and all this other stuff. And then I started to really take an ear to the psychedelic and the progressive stuff. I really liked all the orchestrations and the prog rock. So I got given to Moody Blues and Jethro Tull and Genesis and Yes. And those are still in regular rotation stuff that I listen to. The idea is that, I always want to add more stuff to my library and make it broader, carry all these tunes with me. And so I think the appeal to my generation is that they hear all this old music and there's this kind of this like nostalgia for a time you weren't around in vibe. Like, why isn't there music like this being made today? And so our mission is to try to say, we've got it. Come listen to it. We'll play the new stuff along with the old stuff. So that's how we're trying to reach out to people my age.
And ironically, I tend to scour all the press releases I get from publicists touting new bands to see if I can find the next Jethro Tull, or the next Moody Blues. But I still listen to a lot of that stuff. What's been interesting to me is because the record companies are starving for material and trying to get more out there, they've gone back into the vaults and they find all these demos and live recordings and alternate takes of things. And I almost feel like an archaeologist. I love sort of looking through that, finding early versions of different songs and things.
Or being able to hear, banter between the members when they'll do, a minute of a song. Oh, I think it should be this way instead. Let's try it differently.
That's exciting.
That's what's so cool about watching the Get Back documentary on the Beatles, because they're sitting there composing these songs. And I'm like, no, it doesn't sound like that. And then, you realize it's embryonic versions of all the different songs from Let It Be, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, no, but what are you saying? Like your commentary about modern music, Eric? Are you saying that it's not as lyric oriented? Because I think there's a lot of very interesting modern music, but maybe that's from the production side.
Oh no, it is still very lyrically oriented. I was just saying that for the people like me who have discovered all this old music and been digging through all these tracks that have aged very well over 50 years and saying, why isn't there
That's
more
true.
stuff like this out today? There is. It's just as interesting. It's just as lyrically meaningful, but it's not on popular radio. They don't necessarily wish that they were alive in 1970. They wish that the music that is around now, that is like the music from back in the 1970s, was also the top 40.
Yeah.
And it's not, and like there are very few exceptions, it's never going to be. Like Tame Impala and Arctic Monkeys and maybe like any of Jack White's stuff can occasionally bust into popular radio, but for the most part, it's rock and roll is, it's not dead, but it's very underground.
What's kind of ironic because I think about it, what was a top 40 radio when I was in high school, top 40 radio was Led Zeppelin, Jethro Tull, Fleetwood Mac, Jackson Brown. I mean, these were all, and this was, top 40. Now it's also homogenized. You've got, rap and hip hop, and you've got all the Taylor Swift stuff and the pop music, or you've got Latin. There's so many different genres now that comprise the radio. It's so different from the way it was 40 years ago.
Well, somebody was saying, somebody I just interviewed live stream, he said that, big band. Okay. So we used to hear big band. We're like, okay, what's up with that old music? And he was suggesting that maybe rock is becoming like that now. Like rock, what's up with this? It's maybe it's already peaked. I think it seems.
In terms of
popular. Yeah.
I think it would take a lot to bring it back. I think part of what made rock as big was that it was this youthful format. It was new, it was explosive, it was constantly trying all these new things, and it was tied into like the counterculture movement. There was like it was in the public conscious. It was speaking about stuff going on at the times, and really like nothing else was doing it at a time when all the other like popular stuff was all love songs and stuff. Here you are, all these people singing about like anti-war songs, or like women's liberation songs, or racial equality, all this other stuff that was very poignant and powerful and tied into what's going on in the world. You got other people who do that nowadays, but the novelty, I think, has worn off, and this rebelliousness and youthfulness of rock image has been kind of wiped away. Like you saw it come back a couple of times, like with punk in the 80s, and the youthfulness came back, and then grunge in the 90s and alternative, and the youthfulness came back. And there's really nothing that's done it since grunge. This whole idea that like rock can be like the music of the youth, because right now it's the indie, it's the hip hop, a lot of pop will always be pop, but like rock and roll, unless something else drastically changes, is not the music of the general youth anymore. It's very niche, but
yeah, because the rock stars are aging out of their base.
The old rock stars are. There's still plenty. Right. There's still plenty of young rock stars making cool new rock and roll music, but they're not like selling out stadiums. They're not getting their music licensed to film. They're a lot more hip.
Well, and again, who were the newsmakers back in those days? The rock stars and the movie stars. Now you've got reality stars. You've got TikTok stars. You got so many different places that people can get notoriety, but it's just as fleeting. And at the same time, Mick Jagger does something, it's not news. But back in the day, John Lennon would say something, it was headline news.
Yeah, what do you think about that? When media used to be fewer outlets, and now there's all this other stuff going on.
It's the same thing. You're taking the same audience and you're scattering them over fewer, more and more outlets.
You're creating news bubbles where people's perceptions, are more disjointed from reality than ever. There's something to be said for like, because there's so much media, it means that it's a lot easier for like small stories to get out, because you don't have to like be gated by ABC, NBC, CBS. You can publish stuff online, you can send it to people very easily, but it can also get lost in a sea of noise. Or again, you could have stories that just don't reach people because the media bubble they live in doesn't touch on that, which you could probably also extend that to music. If you only listen to hip hop, you're going to have no idea that there's this huge psychedelic rock scene. I would have no idea about all the like 100 different subgenres of rap or of heavy metal stuff if I didn't have friends who also listened to it.
Well, I mean, this is actually streaming on Twitch because I'm streaming different places. What do you think of Twitch? Do you think that's a good place? Because I've discovered really good music on Twitch.
I've never used Twitch for music. I used it for a lot of video games, but whether I used it for very specific games. And there were a couple of communities that I was very active in. I'm not on there quite as much anymore, just because it was eating up a lot of time that I, didn't really want to be sparing.
Right.
But it's an interesting platform. I'm not sure what the future of it is, just because the number of streamers has gone way up, and so the average audience size has gone way down. It's a cool tool. It's a very interesting tool. But it's also kind of reflective of like the gig economy, and only a handful of people actually can make a full-time living off of it. So as far as like getting your music out there and other such stuff, there's also the problem of the fact that they have like automated copyright bots that trawl for music. And I've seen people who have gotten copyright claim strikes on their own music that they're like playing in front of people. So it has its own problems. It could be a good tool. I think right now it needs work.
Yeah, we tried to set up a live wasn't going to work.
Yeah, it was going to be very difficult to
well, that's sort of like YouTube too, because I put up a mix that my brother created. It's a house mix, house music, and it had to go through all this copyright check before it could be posted.
Which to go back to the whole DMCA Copyright Royalties Board rant, I feel like that's just fighting against the rising tide. Is that like copyright is nice so people can't profit off of other people's work, but at the same time,
if it's a hindrance to legitimate,
if legitimate artists can't get their music out there, it's a hindrance. And for most artists, that's not how they make their money.
Yeah,
only a handful actually make a decent revenue stream from like royalties on streaming music. I think for most people, it would be better for them if it were free and more easily accessible and distributable than it would be if it was copyright gated.
The best thing about the internet, broadly speaking, is the fact that you're not dependent on the local music scene, because especially if you've got a very niche product, you might not find a big enough audience locally. But now, there's no geographic limits to where you can be heard. So if you get in with the right crowd, or you get somebody to support you who's got a bigger following, that's the ticket. And so it's a good thing, I think, because it helps us, because if I wanted to put on a psychedelic radio station, even in a market the size of Chicago, there's no guarantee that it would fly. But when we're heard in 120, 130 different countries, it's a boom.
Now, what do you think the future is of radio and of what you're doing?
Well, I think that the future of terrestrial radio is going to be a far more interesting thing to watch, because, as you know, a station's audience is measured in ratings. Ratings are created by an entity called Arbitron, which was bought by Nielsen, which is basically an extrapolation of, they take a small subset of about 2,000 people. We presume them to be representative of what the audience is in that city, and we're going to ask them to say what they listen to. And I would absolutely venture to guess that if you went in there and you really measured it to see how accurate it would be highly inaccurate, and the listenership would be far less. And the unfortunate thing is some of these stations would implode, because they would never be able to justify what they charge for advertising, because their audiences are probably anywhere from a third to a half of what they think it is. And every time somebody buys a new car that has USB plug, Bluetooth, or satellite radio, it's one less person who's likely to be listening to terrestrial radio.
No one my age that I know listens to terrestrial radio unless there are no other options. So I think that the days are numbered, and that the future of radio is going to be doing what we do online,
which is creating a unique format and finding an audience. Well,
I mean, a lot of stations are online now.
Well, right. They're simulcasting online, but I think it's at some point, the audience for like, analog broadcast radio that comes in on an actual receiver is limited. And it's at some point, like, it's not going to be worth it to keep those stations on the air, or rather it's going to be more valuable to use that frequency band for other like near field stuff. It's going to get eaten up by other communications projects.
The terrestrial radio is mostly beneficial, especially AM radio, which is definitely on thin ice in a time of emergency, because that's when people want to tune in and they need that local information. But so much of information now is global. We're looking at what's going on in Russia or Ukraine or what's happening out in California, Hawaii. And so the focus is local, regional, national, and global.
Yeah, but also at the same time, though, you do have the issues with tech anyway, because, you could have the buffer. I mean, when you're streaming, you're buffering. And if you have only one kind of way to deliver content, it could be challenging.
Yeah, well, that's a problem of I guess, storage and localization. If we just create redundancy and we put a backup of our station out in the cloud or in another physical location, then we got backup. And storage is so readily available and inexpensive these days. Bandwidth is pretty inexpensive these days. Yeah. That that's a very solvable problem. Whereas radio has the unsolvable problem of our audience has a limited lifespan.
Yeah.
And there's no replacement.
And when I look at where people are listening right now to Acid Flashback, Wyoming, Texas, New York, Florida, California, Minnesota, Iowa. A lot of times we get a lot of UK. I've had Brazil. So people are listening all over, which is kind of a neat thing to think about, that somebody could be down in Rio de Janeiro listening to my station.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And speaking of being somewhere else, what's up with, you're from North Carolina?
Yes.
And, seems like a lot of people are leaving our area and moving down there because supposedly it's better.
Well, Asheville, which used to be just a little town that was only known for the Biltmore House, the Biltmore Estates, and as far as just mountain air, has become a haven for hippies that want to relocate from other places. So, I mean, people move here because property taxes are insane. I've had at least a half a dozen friends move to North Carolina or South Carolina in the last 5 or 6 years.
But you're on the North Shore, right? You said Lake Forest.
Yeah, right. We're Lake Bluff, which is right next to Lake Forest in Libertyville.
Well, yeah. So you're not in a cheap tax area. So.
Oh, we're still in the high tax district.
Right. I know. I'm being sorry. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is your area. Of course, people in your area would think that because your area is more higher tax than, let's say, McHenry County or something. So.
Right.
But okay. So when did you come up here?
I moved to Chicago in late 1986.
And so what do you think of it? Like, do you understand why people are moving down there?
I understand why people are moving down there. You get more house, you have more open space, but the politics I've never really agreed with. My friends said, well, would you ever come back here? And I go, no, I don't think so. Okay. People, what's really unique about Chicago is, and they told me this when I got here, and it's absolutely true. Chicago it's a big city with a smaller town mindset. People are so friendly. If you go walk down the street in New York, nobody makes eye contact. Nobody looks at each other. Here, you walk down the street, you make eye contact with somebody, they'll say, hey, hi, how are you? I mean, that's so unique for a large metropolitan area.
Yeah, because I actually live in downtown Chicago, lived in the city for many years, and I have small talk with strangers. Like, we'll be in an elevator, like, yeah, it's really cool. Oh, like your dog, and people just chat, and it's very friendly here, I think. Yeah,
that's a very unique Midwestern Chicago thing. But that's, I think, one of the things I really like about it.
It's definitely stuff I've seen all over the Midwest, but
yeah,
the fact that it still holds true in a city that is this large and this diverse is pretty astounding and impressive.
And now with the fact that there's climate change, I'm sort of rethinking I was like always, well, maybe I'll go retire to California, Arizona, or Colorado. And well, let's see. I live a mile from the largest body of fresh water in North America. The winters have gotten milder. The summers have gotten a little hotter.
Yeah,
but
this is our first real heat wave all summer. Otherwise, it's been very pleasant.
We've had a great summer, and also we have access to so much water. I mean, I've had a lot of water today, and there's no limit to it. Whereas in other places, there's a limit.
Oh yeah, when the water wars start, Chicago's going to be looking pretty nice.
Yeah. But anything else you guys would like to say?
I mean,
well, we want to invite people to check out
Yeah.
our app because you can get it for free for 14 days.
And what's your app? Can you say
around
what
with
it
it?
You can listen, you can get it for free indefinitely. If you wanna come support us and see the additional features and get all the bells and whistles, you can try out the subscription tier for 14 days before you decide to commit to it. You don't have to slap a credit card on there just to get it. It comes for free with a registration. And try out all the different stations. Find the ones that click with you. Tell us which stations you liked, and then what you think what do you think it's missing, or like what format you would like to hear, or if there's any songs you want to hear, we can put them on for you. Also come tell us like what's your new music experience like. How are you still discovering new music today? And in turn, I would love to share some of the stuff I've discovered with any of your listeners. I can link a handful of playlists or like give some artists and album suggestions. I would love to staple that on. To me, that's always a good conversation starter. Who are you listening to? What's their hip album? What's the last cool concert you went to?
And for anybody who's my age, old geezers like me, if you remember what radio used to be like back in the days, whether it was WLS here in Chicago, whether it was WNEW in New York, or any of the great stations out on the West Coast, where the DJs were personalities, where the music was really inventive, was creative, a lot of new artists at the same time, just being able to delve deeper into your favorite artists. I want you to listen to my station or any of our other stations and find a song that you have not heard since you were in high school or college, or something that maybe reminds you when you were first out in the working world. Have that aha moment. That's what I'm trying to get. And I promise you're just not going to find that with a lot of these traditional over-the-air radio stations.
Okay, so what's your app? What's it called?
InternetFM, and it's all one word. It's in the App Store, and it's also on Google Play. Or you can go to our website if you want to see a little more, InternetFM.com.
Okay, and then I'll put that up in the description. So,
and also for those of you, if you're a good avid reader, go get Margaret's book, Wicker Park Wishes. It's a big story that took place in the 90s. And I was thinking about you because we were just out at Peace Pizza and a couple other places in Wicker Park. And I was telling them about how your book takes place in a very different Wicker Park than today's Wicker Park.
Oh my gosh. I mean, Wicker Park's like North Shore now. What happened? I mean, it's so different.
There's a lot of hip places in downtown that I would love to live in if I had the means.
Yeah, but I didn't have the means. I had less. First of all, we didn't have phones and things like that. I didn't have the means, and I just moved to the city and I was hustling. I mean, it depends. I mean, I think it's also the expectation, because there was no way my parents are going to let me live with them, and there was no way I wanted to live with them because it's a different lifestyle. So, because I hear a lot of younger people say that. Oh, wait, how old are you, Eric?
Turning 32 next month.
And then how old are you, Steve?
Me? I'm 63.
Okay, you're not old. I mean, old is like 80 or something, but or 85 or something. But
well, on some days I feel that old.
Right. Okay, so anything else?
No, just just support your local musicians. Go out, buy their vinyl, go see them in concert. Yeah. Tell people if you find a group that you really like.
Tell all your friends. Share new and exciting music with people, and help small artists become big artists. This, as much as we want to talk about our station and our app and our company, this is first and foremost about the music, about the art. Rock and roll is underground. It shouldn't be. It should be popular everywhere, and that's not going to happen unless you, the listener, share with the world your favorite bands. And convince other people to go see them in concert. Everything we do is ultimately for the artists.
And if you do like what we have, please tell a couple hundred of your friends.
Yeah, right. That's true. Okay, I'll post the stuff, but okay, so let me stop this now. And